Hey there, folks. So, this is some slightly different content than you're used to, slightly different content than I'm used to making. But I think this is going to be a really good way to illustrate some of the stuff that I want to teach people. So, basically, what we're going to do today is look at this video of the Boxcars playing Gotta Travel On, Ron Stewart on banjo, obviously, which is where I learned the version from this week's YouTube video. And this performance has so many cool things about it that we should talk about that in order to really explain the value of learning from other players, I can just show you what it is that I watch and think about and try to learn. So let's get into this. Let's start looking at some of these things that Ron's doing on a normal Boxcars gig. Obviously, no more Boxcars, but when the Boxcars were a band, this is the kind of stuff he would do usually on this tune, and then we can apply this to other songs, right? This isn't just Gotta Travel On specific material. This is just bluegrass banjo material, so you can apply it to any song. This just happens to be the video that we're focusing on today. And there really are just a couple main things that I want to talk about when it comes to what is really cool about this performance. First of all, there's obviously the kickoff. There's the second break. So these are the ways that we either play melodies or improvise, or, part of the reason we like this stuff is because of the cool banjo solos. Well, we can talk about what's cool about those things, but I also want to talk about the backup. And the umbrella under which all of this fits is, what is he doing? What is the effect of the things that he's doing? Not necessarily what is he playing. We'll talk about what he's playing, but what is he doing? What is the effect of the types of backup that he's playing behind certain instruments, behind verses and choruses? There's different ways to create a different mood or feeling during these songs. We know sometimes that bluegrass, though there are lots of repetitive things about bluegrass, some of it feels one way, some of it feels another way. The things you play have a certain effect. So that's what I mean by what somebody is doing. That's actually what's more important, right? So let's start out by just listening to this kickoff and then just talk about maybe what's important about it. The first thing I notice is that everything he's playing is very clear. He's not fumbling around with the melody. He obviously knows the melody very well. I doubt he's ever sat down to really learn exactly the specific way he wants to play it. I know that he's played it different ways in videos that I've watched. He has a record called Time Stands Still, which has this tune on it, and he doesn't play the melody exactly like that in the kickoff. Nor does he play the second break on that record the way he plays the second break here. So he's definitely improvising to some extent, but it's all based on the melody. So anytime you're trying to get more comfortable with this, I would take a look at the arrangement that you've learned, for instance, the arrangement here, and look at what the notes of this, what part of the thing that you're playing is the actual melody. So you'll actually have to listen to the song, listen to a couple versions of the song. You'll have to, you don't have to sing, but maybe hum along. Sing is good, hum along with the melody and see if you can find where that is. Then think about, what licks am I playing when the melody note is such and such thing? Right? That's a good example of how you can synthesize some of this information and use it to make other music, right? If you notice that when I sing this note, I play this lick, well, if that note comes up in any other song, like it often does in bluegrass, then you can play that lick and it will emphasize that note. So that's something to think about. But more to this actual recording, this actual version, the first thing that I noticed is that he starts with just that pinch. There's no walk down, nothing like that. The first note of the melody is that open fourth string. Most people would walk down to that. In fact, here's a version of Justin Jenkins playing this tune, and he does a walk down like a lot of people would. But in this case, he just does the pinch. Everybody comes in on beat 1. And you can hear in the beginning, he counts it off. You can actually hear him say 3 because he's been counting it off. Plays the pinch on 4, people come in on beat 1. So 1, 2, 3, pinch, downbeat. Everybody else knows what to do, they just come in. If you want to do this, you might have to just tell the people in your band, hey, let's do it this way. Let's count 1, 2, 3, pinch, and then come in on 1. Here's what's cool. It doesn't really matter what you do anywhere in that space before beat 1, before people come in, as long as they know where that beat 1 is supposed to be. So you can say 1, 2, 3, 4, and everyone just comes in the right place, right? So there's a lot of other options of ways that you can kick things off. But one like that where you don't really get a good sense of where the next beat would be. For instance, if I just said pinch, how does anyone know when beat 1 is? As long as you count off some part of it, then everyone actually knows when to come in, even if you make a mistake, even if you're not comfortable with the timing, whatever it is. As long as you comfortably count out 1, 2, 3, 4, people are just going to come in the right place, hopefully. So you can do this as well. You might just have to tell people, what your idea is of how you want to play this stuff. If you've counted off, with even timing, the people should know when to come in. So you can give that a try. It's a more interesting way to start a song than some of the more basic kickoffs that we do on a more regular basis. Those are great too, but this is a variation, and this is a good example of someone doing that. So the other cool thing about this kickoff is that the tag lick at the end, he plays right up until the point where the chorus comes in, right? He's got a couple fill licks that he plays, and it leads actually right into the chorus, and he plays that 0, 2, 4 on the 4th string, same time as the bass player. They both play it, leading right into the chorus. So, that tag lick where there's those extra 2 measures where people don't usually sing yet, they just are kind of waiting for everything to settle before they sing. You can set that up by doing that 0, 2, 4 thing on the 4th string, and it doesn't have to be with the bass player. I'm sure they didn't plan that, but it can really it sets things up as if it's all intentional, and you don't have to do it exactly that way. There's other licks that lead into it, but if you can do at least that, it makes the whole performance seem more intentional. When really a lot of this is improvised. I doubt they ever actually rehearsed this song and said, "Okay, let's do it all just like this. Let's have the banjo do this, and then the bass will do the walk-up at the same time." No, I guarantee they didn't do that. So you don't have to either. If you practice doing it in the first place, then you'll be ready when somebody else cues you by leading into a section, or you'll cue somebody else by leading into a section. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the backup that he's playing. Check out how little he plays during this.
This old town too long. Summer's almost gone, and the winter is coming on. I played around and played around. This old town too long, and I feel like I've got to travel on.
So while they're singing, he is playing rolls very quietly, and then in between those gaps, he's playing little fill licks that are about a measure long, if that, maybe even just 4 notes or 5 notes or something like that. You don't want to do that all the time. That doesn't fit every type of song, but a song like this, it actually sounds great. So you can rely on the rest of the band to carry everything, right? The banjo doesn't actually have to carry the band. In fact, it rarely does. Hopefully the guitar player, the mandolin player, and the bass player are keeping everything really solid so that you can kind of be in and out and not stepping on the toes of the singer or the soloist or whatever it is. And if you watch the rest of this video, you'll notice that Ron, he does that throughout the entire thing. So I'm not going to transcribe exactly what he plays because it's actually really hard to hear every note that he plays when he's playing quietly, as is the intention there. But here is an example of those fill licks that he's playing with just some really simple rolling backup in between, kind of other things that I've heard him play. Now let's talk about other backup that happens over this, because when they're singing, he's usually just doing that simple backup with some fills in between the words. But other than that, he's just doing that really simple rolling pattern, right? Not nothing too crazy. But what about during the solos? Because in this version, there's a fiddle solo, guitar solo, mandolin solo, and he treats them all a little bit differently. So let's check out what he does behind the fiddle solo. Okay, so hopefully you can tell that he's rolling through that and he's playing pretty loud. So when you're playing backup behind somebody, you have to kind of consider what the point of the thing that they're doing is. If they're singing, well, they're telling a story. The song probably has some kind of story to it, even if it's kind of silly or whatever, as a lot of some bluegrass songs can be. If they wouldn't be singing words, if the point wasn't to listen to what the words say, so you don't want to get in the way of that. And so there's usually phrases, meaning they sing a line, and then there's a little space which somebody fills. Somebody fills that space like the banjo player or maybe some other instrument does. When someone's taking a solo, you're still backing them up, but it's actually a different scenario. There's no words, and there's no set phrases that you know exactly when to jump in here and there, right? And for the most part, people don't take bluegrass solos in this context with big gaps, right? It's actually, you kind of just play through the entire thing. So when you're playing behind a fiddle player, the fiddle is loud, so you can play loud behind it because you want to bring up the energy a little bit, right? Especially earlier in this song, things are much lower, and then things pick up when there's an instrumental. So you actually have to support that, and you have to come up as well. If you ever heard a band playing quietly and there's one really loud soloist, that's not good. You have to come up and meet the soloist, but you also have to keep it simple in terms of what you're playing. So you're playing loud, unlike playing underneath a singer, but you're playing much more simple because you actually don't know if you're about to step on someone's toes by playing a fill lick here and there. Obviously, you'll hear Ron play some fill licks, but it's not designed to be in the spaces. It's not designed to take attention away for a moment and then give it back. It's just something rhythmically interesting underneath the solo, which is kind of just always happening, right? So that's one technique, and that's something that you can do under a louder instrument like the fiddle. Of course, you can do this under really any instrument. It really depends on the sound situation. But in this situation, you're playing under the fiddle, you can kind of just go for it as long as you keep it pretty basic in terms of how complicated the material you're playing is. Now, the next solo is the mandolin solo. Let's take a look at what happens there. Okay, so depending on how closely you were listening, you might think that was the same as what he was doing under the fiddle. And in some ways it was. He was just playing rolling backup, and he wasn't playing nearly as quietly as he was during the verses, right? Okay, so here's how that works. Mandolin is not always the loudest instrument, but especially on stage into a microphone, it's loud enough that you don't have to get out of the way, generally. Especially if, Adam Steffi is your mandolin player, people are going to hear him, right? So he's playing the rolling backup, but it is definitely quieter than it was under the fiddle. The mandolin is not nearly as loud as the fiddle, obviously, so you're going to bring it down a little bit. But then you're also, because you're bringing it down, you don't want to fill nearly as much as you did with the fiddle. If you listen to the two back to back, the fiddle solo and the mandolin solo, he plays way simpler even than he does over the fiddle solo or when he plays over the mandolin solo. So that's worth considering as well. So why is it that you can still roll under the mandolin? Isn't the rule that you're supposed to chop or do the vamping backup when the mandolin's taking a solo? Well, yeah, kind of, depending on what type of bluegrass you want to play and who else is in the band and how solid different people are in different ways. Think about just the context of what these different bands sound like. There's no real rules, obviously, right? So what ends up happening is if you want to sound like traditional bluegrass, well, you do what traditional bluegrass musicians did, like Earl, and yeah, you chop behind a mandolin solo, if there even is a mandolin solo. There rarely was for a while anyway, especially in Flatt and Scruggs, or you definitely vamp or chop or whatever behind Bill Monroe early on. But in more modern bluegrass, that's actually less so the sound, right? The sound of modern bluegrass there's more sustain in the banjo sound, and it's this kind of rhythmic pad that just goes under everything. So sometimes that is actually what you want, is just to roll through it. One of the things that makes that easier is if you have a fiddle player or a dobro player in the band who does take that chopping role. So if the fiddle is chopping or the dobro is chopping, not sounding like a mandolin, but taking over that rhythmic job, then there's two things. You're freed up to roll, which is the unique job of the banjo. Chopping is not the unique job of any instrument, really. It's kind of the main job of the mandolin, but the unique job of the banjo is to roll, so it's actually cool to be able to do that. The other thing is, if somebody else is chopping, you might not want to try and chop it or vamp and potentially, not actually line up perfectly with them. Sometimes you can, and that's great, but actually I've had a lot of experiences where if myself and a fiddle player or myself and a dobro player are trying to chop at the same time, it actually makes things worse. It's actually better if one of us just goes off and does something else. Sometimes the banjo will vamp and the fiddle player then just plays long notes, or the dobro will play chords, but I actually find that I rarely want to do the same thing as anybody else, right? In a situation where I have one of each instrument in the band, if you're at a jam and there's 10 banjos, well, at that point, you're not really performing anyway. It's more practice, so do whatever you want. But in a situation like this, where you're just trying to make the best band sound that you can, then just try not to step on anybody's toes. So, that means don't play backup that overwhelms anything. So play simple backup. Well, also don't play so subdued that you're actually just copying some other instrument, like the fiddle or the dobro that is doing fine chopping on its own. You just do the banjo job and roll. That's fine too. So that's two of our solos here that we have to deal with. The other one would be the guitar. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so he's doing something different here from all the other examples as well. This is something a lot of people don't do, but I think Ron has done it for a long time, and he's kind of popularizing it. Hopefully people start doing it more, because I think it's a really cool sound. He's doing this combination of rolling backup and vamping. He's playing these right-hand patterns that are like these roll patterns, right? But in the left hand, he's doing these kind of vamp chord shapes. So he's not pressing down all the way. It's these muted sounds, but he's creating a lot of really cool rhythm with the right hand. So rather than try to explain it anymore, here's an example of what you could do in that style over this tune. Now, I'm not sure exactly what it is that Ron's doing. It's not like he plays one specific pattern. It's kind of like the rest of the backup where there are different patterns that he plays over different chords, or he just plays it differently every time. It doesn't really matter. It's actually more about what the effect of it is. So if you have different roll patterns that you want to try, or you just like the ones that I used in the example just now, then yeah, by all means do that. But what's nice about this is that, again, you're not stepping on the chop of the mandolin by just doing that, being redundant and doing that at the same time. You're doing the unique job of the banjo, which is these cool roll patterns, but you're also minimizing the volume by not having the strings ringing, right? And it's just a cool percussive sound, right? You're keeping time, you're playing rhythm, so this percussive sound is exactly what you would want. It also brings the volume down considerably, which is nice because then the banjo comes in and is much louder afterwards, and that's a powerful change in volume and dynamics. So you can help yourself out. If you want the banjo solo that comes after a guitar solo, which is a pretty common thing these days, if you want that to be all the more powerful, that juxtaposition, well, you have to do the job earlier and bring the volume down. So that's worth thinking about in terms of foreshadowing, what it is exactly that's supposed to happen next. Now, the last thing we should talk about is just his up the neck backup behind one of the verses. That's a classic thing that people do, is play some backup up the neck, either on one of the verses, or sometimes people will do it on every chorus. If you check out I'll Go Steppin' 2, the way Flatt and Scruggs did it, then you'll notice that people play some sort of up the neck fill every chorus. Well, if you're not doing that, which happens sometimes, usually you're just picking one of the verses and you're doing some kind of up the neck backup. And so I always like to just check out what people are doing and see if there's anything interesting that I can pull from it and use that. There's not one specific type of lick for all this stuff, but there is a language like there is for playing that down the neck stuff. So let's check out this up the neck backup.
Coming at me, boys, coming at me. I share for the police, coming at me, and I feel like I've got a crown on. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of material there, and it can seem distracting. It seems like the antithesis to a lot of the things I've been talking about, which is staying out of the way of the singer and not playing anything too complicated or flashy. Strangely, though, that's like a really normal thing in bluegrass is to play this up the neck backup that's pretty loud, pretty complicated, and it's it kind of keeps things interesting. What I'll say about why that's okay or why that makes sense, given that the common wisdom is to be more simple and stay out of the way, is I think you've laid this groundwork by not playing complicated things. The banjo has actually been pretty far back in the mix this entire time. If you listen to the rest of the choruses and verses, so that once you do, it's not like, wow, this banjo player has been just playing over this entire song. It's like, oh, okay, here's something new for a verse. Because check it out, bluegrass songs are really simple. The words don't tend to be particularly deep. There are 3 chords, and the verse and chorus just goes around and around and around. And then people play the melody for their solo pretty frequently. So you're hearing the melody a lot, you're hearing the verses a lot, you're hearing the choruses a lot. The most interesting thing about bluegrass is not the content of a song like Gotta Travel On or Blue Ridge Cabin Home or Cabin This or Old Home whatever. Like they're great songs and they have important, meaningful content, certainly. But after you've heard the chorus of these songs thousands of times, there's something else that's interesting about this music. It's not just that, it's the performance. So in order to make this stuff more interesting, in order to put that into context that makes it, really interesting to listen to, the first verse can't sound exactly like the second verse or the third verse. So the first verse, maybe nobody takes any fills. Second verse, maybe the mandolin does some fills. Third verse, maybe the banjo does the up the neck fills like we just saw here. So, your job is to stay out of the way, certainly. But then this other job, which you're splitting with all the other musicians, is to just make everything about the, experience for the listener interesting. So it's not, if everyone was staying out of the way all the time, it would actually be very boring. You want to stay out of the way most of the time. And then during one of the verses, like, okay, this is the up the neck banjo verse. How interesting. Most people still not listening to the banjo backup, even if you are being kind of intrusive. The general public tends to just listen to the words, right? Which is good. That's what the song is. But that does, there is a little bit more license to play something slightly more out in the open or more interesting. Okay, and finally, the last thing we should talk about is this second banjo break. A lot of times what will happen is if the banjo kicks off a song, then at the end, we'll come back again and either play the same thing or play some sort of variation. It's a good place to improvise, especially if you played the melody pretty straightforward the first time. Then the second time, you get to kind of let loose a little bit. So that's worth trying. I think also you can learn a lot about what other language a banjo player has by checking out the second break that they play. The first one tends to be something they play pretty similar every time, but especially with Ron Stewart, you'll hear him play different things in that second break on whatever the song is. You'll hear him play all kinds of really interesting stuff. So let's check that out. Okay, so a couple things. Starts with the pinch again. That gives it a sense of continuity. It also gives an opportunity, if you do that pinch and everybody knows, oh, we've got a whole beat where we can kind of just lay back and come in strong again on beat 1. And you notice that the whole band knows to do that. They probably haven't rehearsed that. In fact, I'm certain that they have not rehearsed that specific way. It's just that that's a kind of natural conclusion to that idea. You kicked it off the same way. Pinch during silence, and we all come back in. Kind of the same thing happens later on, and now that's become somewhat of a trope of modern bluegrass. So that might not come naturally to you, so you might have to consciously decide to do it if you like it, or tell people in your band, hey, let's do this thing, right? So take another listen and try to emulate that if you like that thing. I do. Another thing that's really cool is that he starts out with the melody, right? Starts out pretty much the same way, that first note, but then pretty quickly just goes to somewhere else. It's not the melody that he's playing. It's just other material over that G chord, that one chord. And it looks to me a little bit like he doesn't exactly have a plan for where he's going, because he kind of looks up like, where do I go from here? And you can tell that Adam Steffi kind of can tell that that's the case because he looks at him and smiles. It's not even remotely close to the idea that he doesn't know what he's doing or that he gets lost or anything like that. It's actually the opposite, that he's so comfortable with the rhythm of the song, where the chords lie, what the melody is, that he's so ready for whatever happens that he's like, well, where will I go from here? There's so many options. This could go anywhere, you know? So take another look and just look at how he reacts to his own playing and how comfortable he must be to play that well in front of people with such a high caliber band, not really having a distinct plan ahead of time. It's like you can tell he's like, yeah, I know it's not the melody, but it's pretty cool. We'll see where it goes. That's kind of what I imagine he's thinking. Who knows what he's thinking and whatever. But it's worth considering that for yourself, that if you can get really comfortable with when the chords are supposed to change, you don't always have to play exactly the melody, especially on a second break. You can take another idea that you have and see if it fits there, and then see if you can bring it back so that it actually lands back on the melody, which is what he does. So take another listen to the second half where he transitions back into what the melody is normally. So that lick at the end, he plays another one during the Up the Neck Backup, obviously. How do you explain that? Well, it's not like something else where you can just say that it fits over this chord because you're playing C during the C chord and D during the D chord. It's not really like that. It's just a blues lick, which means it just kind of fits anywhere if you want it to sound bluesy in that appropriate key. But think about this. That lick works over what you would call a turnaround, which in this case is going C to D to G, right? Or 1 to 4 to 5. But you can also do that with G, D to G, like in any other bluegrass song that does that quick G, D, G movement. It basically just covers those bases where you're taking up that amount of space and you're just landing back on 1 at the beginning of that measure when you get back to the G chord. So, you know, you could look deeper into this in terms of the rhythm and how each note relates to each chord, whatever it is, but I don't think that's actually going to help you understand the point of this. So as an example, here's how you could use that lick in a song like, let's say, Fireball Mail. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this new version of content. I'm trying to figure out the best way to share some of these ideas, and hopefully this gives a little more context to the things I think about when I'm practicing or learning how to play this stuff, and some different ways that you can use this information as more than just the arrangement of a song, right? Because I don't really think of Gotta Travel On as, well, I gotta have my exact thing that I play on Gotta Travel On, right? Well, this is really more like just an example of the kind of banjo playing that I like and how I can apply that to other things. Something that I'm always trying to work on by listening closely and watching closely, slowing things down, learning them by ear. That's all I'm doing really on a regular basis, and that's how I learn things. So hopefully this has been helpful to you, and please let me know if this is content that you enjoy, or maybe have an idea of other videos that I could do this sort of commentary on. In order to give you some insight into what's happening. You know, if you have specific questions about certain videos, that's another way that this could work. So we'll see, but it's worth a shot for the moment. So hopefully you'll enjoy this, and I will see you again for another video shortly. Thanks.